This is part 6 of our sweet corn grow along, and we are looking today at harvesting them, which I'm doing as fast as I can now with a 2 tonight, which is possibly going to be a frost. That would be an extremely early frost for me, about 2 months earlier than I'd expect it. So because these aren't going to be frost hardy, I've harvested as many as I can, and then we're going to be going inside and we're going to be looking at how to preserve them in the freezer. So I've got a decent sized basket that have come off these plants, and actually these plants did suffer a little bit and were more stunted than I usually find that they are. So they've done better than I expected. The pollination hasn't happened, I don't think, right to the top of every cob, but it has pollinated enough to have a nice looking corn on the cob for me. So move these silks out of the way. So this is what my corn on the cob is looking like. You can see at the top we are missing some of the pollination, but actually if they've been allowed, it's only that part there that's actually missing the pollination. If they've been allowed to mature a little bit longer, then these would have also started to ripen up as well. One of the things that I think is often missed with corn on the cob is it comes in its own packaging. So actually, this is how it's going to go into my freezer. It will go into one large carrier bag just to make sure that they are all together and they don't get lost. But otherwise, that is how they will go. I'm not going to peel them and then put them in plastic. They are just going to go in like this, and they come out absolutely beautiful the other end. On the other end, you can also then, from frozen, pop them in the oven like this. If you're worried about them, just put a little bit of tin foil over them, and the steam that it generates within the skin will actually cook them beautifully as well, the other end. So the other ways we're going to look at freezing them today is also going to be to parboil them and then cut them into kernels in order to freeze them individually as well. One thing about freezing them is you're likely to also freeze a few bugs within the layers of the skin. So you may want to take off a couple of layers before you do pop them in the freezer if you are going to do them like that. If you do prefer to make sure that they are, clean before you do put them in, then do just, I've got a couple of earwigs in this one. So that is peeled perfectly from my point of view to go into the freezer. But if you do want them completely clean, then peel them and just pop them into a bag. I don't think they need to be parboiled, but you could parboil them exactly the same as you do the ones that we're going to take off of the corn as well. Another interesting thing is, because we grow them organically, these silks that come off of the cobs are actually fantastic to dehydrate now and get them into a pot and use them for fevers. They can just be brewed into a tea, and they're fantastic when you've got a little bit of temperature. So yeah, this one's not quite actually pollinated quite as well, and it seems like a lot of people have had that trouble this year. I think as they were pollinating there was an awful lot of wet weather, so maybe that didn't help in reality, but they're perfectly good for what we're going to use them. We'll just sort of chop off the top and then use them like that. So we're going to grab hold of the cob, pull it down and then twist, and it'll just break off in your hand like that. Chances are that these smaller ones at the bottom are not going to develop now with the cold weather coming in, so I'll probably just dispose of those with the plants later on. The corn on this side is a lot less mature than the corn on the other side, but with a now predicted 2 tonight, I am going to harvest the rest, and actually they are just ready, so they should be fine. You can also find as you snap them that it snaps the entire plant off as well, which is only a problem if you've got some further up that aren't ready. Otherwise, just discard it. This is one of the bottom corn. So some that start developing a little bit later. You may find that you have some of these as well. And what we're likely to find in here is an underdeveloped cob that isn't now going to get the opportunity. It looks a little bit more like baby corn, but actually if it had been given time, then some of this may well have matured. But I don't have time now with this possible frost coming tonight. I will leave the majority of them on the plants and we'll see whether they do mature, but they're not far along enough yet to actually harvest these. We got a decent amount out now, and all we're going to start doing now is cleaning them up and processing them. While we do that, we want to get a pan on to boil, and then we want another big dish ready with some ice water in as well. And then the first thing that I'm doing is just starting to clean off a few of these. I'm going to probably open about 5 of them to process as corn for the freezer, so individual pieces of corn, and then the rest I'm just going to clean up a little bit in order to put them in the freezer like they are. And then I'm going to save some of these silks as well for the medicine. So as you can see, it looks like the majority of these haven't pollinated quite to the top. They've done pretty well. So that's the 3 that I've done so far. Oop, I'm throwing around. If you find that a lot of your little cobs are looking like this, where they sort of look as though they've dried up and they've gone a little bit funny, so if they were all the way down, then that would be that they've been left on the plant for too long and they're likely to be a little bit starchy, not quite as sweet. You'll often find as well that the ones that are around the edge of the square that we made are also not quite as pollinated as the others. It could also be that this is one off of the bottom, because I did take a couple of those that were looking a little bit fat, but they're still edible. These are now going to go in this boiling water for 3 minutes, and then once they've had that 3 minutes, we'll put them into the ice bath. Probably going to get them all in there. Yep. We set that timer once the pot comes back to the boil for these. Now I'm just going to go ahead and peel back a few layers of these, ready just to go into the freezer as they are. They're likely to have things like earwigs in them. I believe earwigs actually get their name from living in corn in the cob rather than being annoying in our own ears. So this is one that I've already peeled to test it was ready, so I will be putting that one in completely peeled. The alarm has just gone off for these, so we're going to get them into the ice bath now. This is also going to help us start to touch them in a minute when we want to be taking off these individual little corns. So I'm going to let them cool down before we start doing anything else with them. So just try and sort of make that cold water move about so there isn't any pockets of heat, and then we'll come back to that in a moment. These 16 cobs are now just going to go straight into the freezer as they are. I don't have room to put them in a bag, so they're just going to go in loose for now. They should store in the freezer perfectly fine now for around 6 months, but up to a year you may find that it does slightly start to reduce some of the freshness. These have been now in the cold water for a few minutes and they are ready for us to start chopping them up. So I'm just going to remove those top bits just because that's not the corn that we want to take. And then we're going to look at 2 different options of how we can remove these individual corns. So the first one, which doesn't leave them as pretty as what you buy in the store, would literally just be to take your knife and run it down your cob. Now, depending on how fat each of these corns are, you may find that it doesn't actually get much off. It's also quite slippery. But it's probably what most people do. And then I'm just going to pop them in here, and if you just give them a little bit of a rub, they should start coming up individually. And then another option is to locate one row of the corn and actually remove that row by running the knife along each side of the row, making sure you know which row you did, because that's not easy either. And then taking that row out and popping it in the bowl. And then from here we should just be able to push each of these corns off and get more than we do from the first variety, from the first option. So you get a more full little kernel. Still pretty fiddly, and it's one of the reasons why we don't normally do this at all. We normally just put them straight into the freezer and eat them as cobs. This is very fiddly and time consuming. Find that you get the entire piece of corn like you find from the supermarket. You can really see the difference between the two of how much you actually get off of these as well. I'm going to get my husband to do the other 4 just because it's a very painful thing for me to do. So these are the little kernels that we have now, and some of them will stick together a little bit, but as you cook them they do tend to fall apart, so you can break them up a little bit, but it's not a huge problem really. Obviously they're not going to be as pretty as the ones that you buy in the shops, that you're going to have some of the little bits and bobs about as well. So the next thing we want to do is get these into a bag to be frozen, and we want to do this as quick as possible to keep them as fresh as they can be, but this should be done within an hour today, so that's ideal. But if you can't deal with it straight away, then pop them into the fridge and deal with them as quickly as you possibly can. Now I'm just putting these onto a parchment lined baking tray, and we're going to pre-freeze them before they go into the bag to stay in the freezer. This is just going to help us to individually take out what we want rather than needing to use the entire clump at the same time. We'll take off as much excess as we can, and then they'll just be bagged up the other end. These should take around 30 minutes to half an hour just to flash freeze, and then we can pop them in the bags after that. And then this is the uncooked corn that we've got left, and we're just going to pop these straight into a bag and then into the freezer. I'm going to use my machine to pack these, but you could just put them into a normal bag. My husband's just taken the end off, so that's not a problem. If you are using a machine like one of these, then they can be cooked in the bag rather than needing to be taken out and cooked. You can also pop a blob of butter in if you like to eat them with the butter, and then they should be perfectly cooked when you take them out.